Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that the cargo ship, Brooklyn, traveled 24,000 miles from New York to Yerba Buena, now San Francisco, carrying 238 Latter-day Saint pioneers who were seeking religious freedom after years of persecution? Learn how these faithful saints endured one of the longest religious voyages in history and how their arrival instantly doubled the population of the small California settlement. Discover that the ship carried a printing press, books, farming equipment, seeds, and even cows, pigs, and chickens to help establish a new community, while the passengers demonstrated remarkable courage, perseverance, and trust in God on their journey. I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are moving across the country.
Right, like a big cross-country move.
Yeah, exactly. But instead of renting a moving van and, packing up your living room in some cardboard boxes, you are packing a 125-foot wooden cargo ship.
Wow.
And you aren't just packing your immediate family, you're packing 238 people, 40 live pigs, 2 milk cows, a massive iron printing press, and a 179-volume library.
That's a lot for a wooden ship.
Right. And the kicker is, you are going to be sealed inside this wooden vessel for nearly 6 months.
It sounds like, honestly, a surreal logistical nightmare. But this is actually one of the most remarkable and really overlooked migrations of the 19th century.
It really is.
When we look at the source material we're covering today, we're talking at a level of endurance and societal planning that completely reframes how we understand the American pioneer experience.
Yeah, because we are so conditioned to picture covered wagons, kicking up dust on the prairie, we completely ignore the pioneers who battled oceanic typhoons at the bottom of the world.
Exactly. We just forget about them.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at the true historical account of a ship called the Brooklyn.
Such an incredible story.
It is. Our mission today is to explore one of the longest religious ocean voyages ever recorded. We're talking about a 24,000-mile epic journey that ended on July 31st, 1846.
And really changed history.
Totally. Because when this specific ship finally dropped anchor, it literally doubled the size of a sleepy coastal town called Yerba Buena.
Which listeners might actually know today as San Francisco.
Right. But before we get to the cargo and the destination, we have to look at the motivation. Why on earth would over 200 pioneers choose a perilous sea route, sailing all the way around South America, instead of simply walking across the plains like the rest of the overland trails?
Well, the motivation really comes down to a dire situation in early 1846. So these pioneers were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and for years they had faced severe, really violent persecution, which forced them to flee from their homes across various states.
Just constant moving.
Yeah, exactly. By 1845, the bulk of them were centralized in Nauvoo, Illinois. But it became glaringly obvious that they were going to have to relocate again.
Right.
And this time, they had to go outside the existing borders of the United States, literally just to survive.
So they're effectively refugees looking for a geographical escape hatch.
Yes, exactly.
But the main body of the church did exactly what we usually picture. They went overland. In fact, the sources note they began leaving Nauvoo on February 4th, 1846.
Which is a very significant date.
Right, because that happens to be the exact same day the Brooklyn set sail from New York. But I'm getting hung up on the economics here.
Oh, the money aspect.
Yeah, like if they are refugees fleeing persecution, how does buying over 200 ocean fares make any financial sense? Sailing a ship around a continent doesn't sound like the budget-friendly alternative to walking.
It seems totally counterintuitive until you examine the hidden capital costs of an overland trek.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, you couldn't just walk west empty-handed. You had to purchase a custom-built wagon, multiple teams of expensive draft animals like oxen or mules.
Oh, right, and they need food, too.
Exactly. Plus harnesses, spare parts, weapons, and enough specialized, non-perishable food to keep a family alive for months in the wilderness.
So it adds up fast.
The upfront capital required to outfit an overland company was astronomical. With a ship ticket, the transport, the shelter, and the basic provisions are all bundled into one upfront cost.
Oh, I see. It's like an all-inclusive package.
Exactly. And not everyone could afford an overland outfit. So in November 1845, A church leader named Orson Pratt went to New York to find a maritime solution for the Saints on the East Coast.
And Pratt delegates this to a young printer named Samuel Brannan. And Brannan turns around and recruits a staggering group of people.
You really did.
The demographic breakdown in the sources is fascinating. It's 70 men, 68 women, and 100 children.
100 kids.
I mean, taking 2 kids on a 4-hour road trip in a minivan requires a serious game plan. Brannan was preparing to take 100 children on a wooden boat for half a year.
It's wild to even think about.
But from what I'm reading, securing the ship itself was nearly impossible, right?
Yeah, geopolitics made it incredibly difficult. There were widespread rumors of an impending war with Mexico at the time.
Okay.
And because of that, most ship captains didn't want to commit their vessels to a long, slow passenger voyage.
Why not?
Well, they knew that if war broke out, the government would pay a massive premium to transport munitions and supplies.
Oh, sure. Follow the money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Transporting military freight is highly predictable and, very lucrative. Cannonballs don't complain about the food, they don't consume fresh water, and they don't require sanitation.
But passengers definitely do.
Right. Passengers are a lot of work.
That makes a lot of sense. You are essentially competing with the military for cargo space, and humans are high-maintenance cargo.
Very much so.
But eventually they locate Captain Abel W. Richardson, who owns a cargo ship built in 1834 named the Brooklyn. And Brannan negotiates a fare of $75 for adults and half price for the children.
Which was a massive financial commitment for these families, but, it secured their passage. However, we really have to clarify what they were actually boarding.
Right, this wasn't a cruise ship.
Not at all. The Brooklyn was fundamentally built to haul heavy freight, not to sustain a floating community. The transition from a cargo hold to a human habitat was, well, it was brutal.
I can imagine.
The ship was 445 tons, measuring just 125 feet long, 28 feet wide, and 14 feet deep.
Let me stop you and visualize that for a second. A standard school bus is about 40 feet long.
Okay, yeah.
So this ship is roughly the length of 3 school buses placed end to end. And 28 feet wide is about the width of a 2-lane residential street.
That's a really good way to picture it.
If you have 238 people, plus the captain and the sailing crew living in that footprint, how does the daily logistics of eating and working even function?
It required a level of regimentation that is just hard to fathom today. The living space was severely restricted because a massive portion of the ship's interior was taken up by the cargo hold.
So where did they actually live?
Well, to make the passenger quarters functional, they retrofitted the ship with a single, massive, long table that ran almost the full length of the living area.
Just one table.
Yeah, one table. And that table was the absolute hub of their existence.
But the math on the seating doesn't add up. You can't fit 238 people around one table simultaneously, even if it runs the length of the ship.
No, you couldn't. This meant life revolved around a strict, relentless schedule of shifts.
Oh, wow.
The table was never empty. It was used in rotations for dining, for schooling the 100 children, for council meetings, for sewing and work. They even held their Sabbath services there.
That sounds exhausting.
And perhaps the most physical reality of this setup is that, other than the sleeping berths, there were literally no other seats on board the ship.
Wait, really? No chairs?
No. You were either sitting at the table during your assigned shift, standing up, or lying in your bed.
And referring to them as beds feels like a stretch, honestly. The sources describe the berth as hard, shelf-like seats built on 4 sides below the deck in an area with incredibly low ceilings.
Yes, very cramped.
You are essentially sleeping on a wooden bookshelf in a crowded basement.
A basement that is constantly pitching, rolling, and heaving.
Yeah.
The cramped quarters were an intense psychological challenge just during calm weather. But when the winter storms hit, it transitioned from an inconvenience into a literal fight for survival.
Oh, I bet.
The captain and his seasoned crew were genuinely unsure at times if the ship could withstand the weather. And when things got critical, the captain would order everyone hatched below.
The mechanics of being hatched below are terrifying when you think of it.
Absolutely terrifying.
Because the crew literally battened down the heavy wooden hatches to prevent the crashing waves from flooding the lower decks and sinking the ship. But that means sealing 238 people in the underbelly with no natural light, severely limited oxygen, and the intense heat of hundreds of bodies packed together.
Just claustrophobic.
Yeah, you're just trapped in the dark, listening to the ocean, trying to tear the wood apart. I want to read a quote from the source material. This is from a passenger named Augusta Joyce Crocheron, and it captures this terror perfectly.
Oh, please do. Her account is one of the most vital primary sources we have for understanding the real human cost of this journey.
So she wrote, quote, "As for the pleasure of the trip, we met disappointment. For we once lay becalmed in the tropics, and at another time we were hatched below during a terrific storm. Women and children were at night lashed to their berths, for in no other way could they keep in."
They had to tie themselves down.
Right. She goes on, "Furniture rolled back and forth, endangering limb and life. The waves swept the deck and even reached the staterooms."
Just unimaginable chaos.
Yeah, and then this part gets me. She says, "Children's voices were crying in the darkness, mothers' voices soothing or scolding, men's voices rising above the others, all mingled with the distressing groans and cries of the sick for help, and above all, the roaring of the wind and howling of the tempest made a scene and feeling indescribable."
I mean, think about the physics of that moment.
Mm-hmm.
The ship is pitching so violently that you have to physically tie yourself and your children to a wooden shelf in pitch blackness just to avoid being thrown across the room.
It sounds like a nightmare.
Furniture is smashing around you, people are violently seasick, and the noise of the wind and the wood groaning is just deafening.
But what stands out in the historical record isn't just the terror, but how they reacted to it. While the sailors above deck were literally preparing to sink, the sources note that these pioneers, locked in the dark, responded by singing hymns. They maintained an absolute certainty that they would be protected. And practically speaking, when you are lashed to a board in total darkness, singing together might be the only way to prove to each other that you're still there. That you're still alive.
It is a profound psychological survival mechanism. They actively maintained their community identity in the darkest possible conditions.
Wow.
But surviving the storms was only half the equation. If space was at such an absolute premium that people were sleeping on shelves and eating in shifts, it forces us to ask what was taking up the rest of the ship.
Right. A 445-ton cargo vessel has to be holding something significant to justify forcing the passengers into such tight quarters. And here's where it gets really interesting.
It really does.
Because they weren't just fleeing with the clothes on their backs, they packed a floating starter kit for an entire civilization.
They dedicated a full third of their massive cargo hold to heavy machinery and agricultural tools.
A third of the ship.
Yeah. We were talking about plows, shovels, hoes, scythes, massive quantities of nails and glass, the heavy iron components required to build a sawmill, and even a cast iron grist mill for grinding grain.
So they are essentially bypassing the hunter-gatherer subsistence phase and bringing the Industrial Revolution with them on a wooden boat.
Exactly. They were prepared.
But they didn't just pack hammers and nails, they brought a printing press. And they knew a press is useless without supplies, so they packed a 2-year supply of paper and ink.
So smart.
They brought textbooks for school classrooms. They brought exactly 179 volumes from the Harper's Family Library. They prioritized information, education, and communication exactly as highly as they prioritized agriculture.
Because they understood the mechanics of building a lasting society. A grist mill feeds the physical body and ensures you survive the first winter.
Right.
But a printing press and a library feed the mind, establish a shared culture, and allow you to govern. They also packed seeds for planting and dry goods specifically intended to be sold in stores once they arrived. So this wasn't a desperate flight. It was a highly calculated colonization effort.
We also have to address the livestock because the logistics of this just boggle the mind. They brought 2 milk cows, 40 pigs, and crates of chickens and birds.
40 pigs on a boat.
How do you keep 40 pigs alive on a ship for 6 months? They require massive amounts of feed, they create an unbelievable amount of waste, and the smell of dozens of farm animals trapped in a damp wooden hull with 238 people must have been completely overwhelming.
It was a logistical nightmare. Every animal required fresh water, which was already heavily rationed, and their feed took up valuable cargo space.
So why bring them?
Well, the livestock was a non-negotiable insurance policy. If they arrived and the local crops failed, or they just couldn't establish agriculture immediately, those animals were the only buffer against starvation.
And they had to keep those animals and themselves alive across one of the most punishing routes on the planet. I want to trace this 24,000-mile path because they didn't take a shortcut.
There were no viable shortcuts for the sheer weight of the society they were packing. You couldn't just unload a cast iron grist mill and a printing press in Central America and drag it through a tropical jungle.
Yeah, that wouldn't work.
The cargo forced them into the longest, most dangerous ocean route possible. From New York, they sailed south across the Atlantic equator all the way down to the southern tip of South America to round Cape Horn.
And Cape Horn is infamous for a reason. You have the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans violently colliding, massive rogue waves, icebergs, and freezing gale force winds.
It is arguably the most treacherous stretch of water in the world, especially for a 19th century sailing vessel.
Unbelievable.
But after surviving the Horn, they turned north, crossing the Pacific equator. They made stops at Juan Fernandez Island off the coast of Chile to take on fresh water and wood, and then sailed all the way across the Pacific to the Sandwich Islands, which we now know as Hawaii, before finally turning back toward the coast of California.
A journey of that magnitude takes a devastating human toll. The sources are very clear about the life and death realities of this 5-month and 27-day voyage. 2 babies were actually born on this ship.
Yes.
One boy was born just after they rounded Cape Horn, and they named him Atlantic. Later, a little girl was born, and they named her Pacific.
It really highlights the passage of time and the raw human endurance required. But the tragedy is just as prominent in the historical record. 10 lives were lost during the journey, 4 adults and 6 children.
That's heartbreaking.
And 9 of them had to be buried at sea.
Losing 6 children on a voyage where you started with 100 means nearly every family on that ship was intimately touched by grief. But the brutal reality of sailing ship is that you can't stop to mourn. The wind keeps blowing, the ship keeps moving, and you just have to endure.
And endure they did. After nearly 6 months of incredibly cramped quarters, rationing, storms, births, deaths, and 24,000 miles of ocean, this floating microcosm of a society finally dropped anchor. On July 31st, 1846, the Brooklyn sailed into the harbor of Yerba Buena.
And the contrast has to be jarring. You spend half a year fighting for survival on a pitching deck, and suddenly you arrive in a very small, quiet postal settlement. When these 200-plus pioneers disembarked, the sheer volume of passengers immediately doubled the population of the town in a single afternoon.
The culture shock must have been palpable. Yerba Buena was a diverse but quiet outpost.
Right.
The pioneers were greeted peacefully by American settlers, Spanish families, and local Native Americans. But the passengers of the Brooklyn didn't arrive to just integrate. They arrived to build.
Because of all that cargo.
Exactly. They set up tents, took over a deserted adobe house, and immediately began unpacking the plows, the sawmill irons, and the printing press.
We actually have a primary source detailing exactly how the locals reacted to this sudden influx of people. There was an article published in the local paper, The Californian, on August 15th, 1846, just 2 weeks after the ship landed.
Oh, I love this article.
It's so interesting. It notes that the, quote, watchword of the Mormons now is California. It acknowledges that they left the States because of severe difficulties and resolved to break up and be off. But what is really telling is how the captain of the ship, Captain Richardson, described them to the locals.
Which is important, because Captain Richardson spent 6 months observing them in the absolute worst possible conditions. If anyone understood their true character under pressure, it was him.
Exactly. And the paper reports that Captain Richardson spoke of them in the most favorable manner. He noted they lived in peace together and appeared to be quiet and orderly. The local paper emphasized that they came with the determination to make a settlement, highlighting their plows, their tools, and their commitment to education.
The writer of The Californian approaches them with a really fascinating objectivity. The article openly acknowledges that the locals and the pioneers differ on many essential points of doctrine and practice.
So they didn't ignore the religious differences.
No, they didn't ignore them at all. But despite that, the paper writes, quote, "Yet our best wishes and prayers go with them. May the fostering smiles of a benignant providence rest upon them. They are to lay the foundation of society and institutions, social, civil, and religious. Oh, may they be such that coming generations shall rise up and call them blessed."
They're to lay the foundation of society. The locals recognized instantly that these people weren't transients or grifters. They were planting deep, permanent roots.
Yes, they saw the vision.
When you synthesize all the source material, the flight from violence, the brutal economics of outfitting a ship over a wagon, the 6 months of terror and shift work, the sheer audacity of dragging a printing press to a tent city, it highlights the courage, faith, and obedience required to pull this off.
It truly does.
They held daily prayer meetings, followed the counsel of their leaders, and trusted their captain when the situation seemed hopeless.
Which brings a very compelling modern perspective into focus. The source material includes a quote from a modern leader of their faith, Elder M. Russell Ballard, from a talk titled "Stay in the Boat and Hold On."
Oh, that's a perfect connection.
It is. He draws a line between physical survival and spiritual survival, noting that people who, quote, have not stayed in the boat and have not held on with both hands during times of trials and troubles often lose their focus on central truths.
So, what does this all mean? When you look at the physical reality of what the passengers of the Brooklyn went through, staying in the boat wasn't a metaphor for them. It was raw physical survival.
No, it was literal.
If you didn't literally tie yourself to the wood during a storm, you were thrown against the hull or washed overboard. The ideology was born out of absolute terrifying necessity.
The boat represents the foundational principles that keep you afloat. When the storms of life hit, whether those are historical persecutions, logistical nightmares, or personal tragedies, you don't jump ship into the roaring ocean. You lash yourself to the truths you know, and you endure until the storm breaks.
And once the storm passes and you reach your destination, you rely on the tools you brought with you to build something that lasts. Just to quickly recap the sheer scale of what we've unpacked today, we are talking about ordinary people who couldn't afford a massive overland expedition.
Right.
So instead, they rent a 125-foot cargo ship. They pack it with 100 children, 40 pigs, a sawmill, and a library. They sail 24,000 miles around the most dangerous cape in the world, surviving tempests by tying themselves to their beds in the dark.
Just staggering.
And they arrived to instantly double the size of the town that would become San Francisco, bringing with them an unshakable faith and the industrial tools of a new society.
It proves that human resilience, when paired with a clear sense of purpose and meticulous logistical planning, can overcome almost impossible environmental odds.
Which leaves us with a question for you listening right now. The local paper in 1846 recognized that these pioneers arrived to lay the foundation of society and institutions. They did it with a printing press, 179 books, heavy machinery, and their faith. So, if you were forced to board a 125-foot ship today to lay the foundation of a brand new society, and you knew you could only bring the exact equivalent of what the Brooklyn carried, what would be in your cargo? What core books, what specific tools, and what fundamental ideas would you pack to ensure that coming generations would rise up and call you blessed?
That is a question worth thinking about long after the anchor drops.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you for joining us for this day in His story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in His story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.